Good. So thank you very much for the invitation, Victor, Anna, everybody at the festival. I'm delighted to participate again. I'm also looking forward to coming to Skopje next week and introducing another film, the African classic Tuki Buki, for you. But today I want to talk about Cailín Ciúin, or The Quiet Girl in English, in relation to the thought of Deleuze and Guattari. So let's begin. Go. Here we go. Yeah. So the release and national and international success of Colm Baréad's and Cailín Ciúin, or The Quiet Girl, is part of a major contemporary moment for Irish cinema, coming at a time of great political and social change in the country and describing another such moment 40 years ago. This simple yet powerful story is centred on a girl caught, or in English something like Kate, from a poor rural family in the Ireland of 1981, sent to stay with richer childless relatives, the Kinsellas, for the summer, in the course of which she discovers the previous tragic loss of their son and becomes almost a replacement for the child that they lost. The most commented on aspect of the film's success in the media, as our chair just said, is that it is the most successful Irish language film in history at the box office, as well as the first Irish language feature film nominated for major awards, including the Oscar for Best Foreign Film. In an interview with Gold Derby, Baréad argued that the film was important in terms of bringing representation to the Irish language, starting new conversations about it within Ireland, and speaking to the world in our own native tongue. By choosing to frame the issue in these terms, Baréad thus raises the question of the representation of a minority language and thus a minority community. He also raises the question of authenticity, the ability to tell a story of a community to an international audience in the way that seems best suited to the storytellers, actors and filmmakers. But as this is an international audience, I did just want to begin with a few basic facts about the linguistic situation in Ireland. Hopefully you can see the gradual effects of British colonialism on Ireland there. For a long time, most people in Ireland spoke Irish as their native tongue, even while living under English colonial rule. During the 19th century, however, the language started a steep decline, accelerating during the Great Famine of the 1840s, which hit Irish-speaking areas in the west of the country particularly hard, and which was followed by many waves of immigration due to economic legacy of colonialism and racism led to the language becoming associated with poverty and backwardness, and thus stigmatized it even among those who could speak it. It disappeared from much of the country, as you can see in that fourth image, remaining in everyday use only in some small rural areas of the country in the west and the south, known as Gaeltacht. Since what we now call the Republic of Ireland became independent in 1921, the government has... can you see my screen there? Has it paused? You can see it, okay. The government has pursued policies attempting to re-establish the language in the English-speaking parts of the country with some success, albeit severely limited success. So today, while significant resources are devoted to the revival and the promotion of the Irish language, including special funds dedicated to the production of feature films, a funding competition which this film won. And while the language is still obligatory in the nation's schools, the relationship of the Irish language to Irish identity remains very problematic to Irish people. Some damn the language as obsolete and a waste of time and money, while others consider its preservation to be the only way of preserving a separate Irish identity and culture. The significant majority of people in the Republic of Ireland claim to support Irish, that often only amounts to lip service without being accompanied by serious efforts either to learn the language or to speak it. So that's a little primer, and I'll move on to the film now. A reading of Cailín Ciúin could, I believe, be profitably accomplished by looking at it through the conceptual framework constructed by Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari, and in particular by looking at two distinct yet related concepts. The first is that of minority, as expressed in particular in Deleuze and Guattari's elaboration of the concept of minor literature, which they examine in their book Kafka, Towards Minor Literature. The second is that of political cinema, which Deleuze develops in relation to the notion of a people who are missing, and which is detailed in particular in the second of the two 1980s works he devotes to cinema, Cinema to the Time Image. In the earlier text, Kafka, Deleuze and Guattari explicitly link an artistic statement, such as a film, to the notion of a collective expression of a people, arguing that, quote, when a statement is produced by a bachelor or an artistic singularity, it occurs necessarily as a function of a national, political, or social community, even if the objective conditions of this community are not yet given, end quote. Having said this, and Cailín Ciúin is not an explicitly political film, in the sense that it is not a film which tackles head-on and discursively any of the deep-rooted social issues which bedeviled the Ireland of the day, whether they be partition of the country and continued political violence, social oppression and the power of the Catholic Church, the lack of freedom, the weak social position of women, mass immigration, high unemployment, profound economic crisis, or even the continuing debate over government support for the Irish language. So in this short paper, and as I begin my research on Cailín Ciúin, I want to focus in particular on the differences between the film and its source text, which is this novella by Claire Keegan Foster. There are two significant differences which I want to focus on in this paper. The first difference is linguistic. Foster is set exclusively in English-speaking Ireland in County Wexford, to the southeast, without any suggestion that the characters are speaking Irish at any point. But Cailín Ciúin is largely, though not exclusively, shot in the Irish language and features Irish-speaking characters. The filmmakers transplant the action from Wexford to Anrin, the Gaeltacht in County Waterford, and thus change many of the names of persons and places. Secondly, and unlike the book, the linguistic divide runs through the central family, with the young protagonist Caught, her mother, her siblings, and her so-called foster parents, the Kinsellas, all Irish speakers, while in the film, Caught's neglectful deadbeat father is depicted as only speaking English, with there being some ambiguity as to whether he is even capable of speaking Irish at all, or whether he merely chooses not to do it. Now, in Kafka, Deleuze and Guattari reject the notion of a minor literature or minor cinema being merely the reification, or in their terms, a desperate attempt at symbolic reterritorialization of a minor subject position. That is, a film does not become minor in their terms simply because it is shot in a minor language like Irish. In speaking Irish, neither the characters nor the filmmakers are trying to make any kind of overt political statement, unlike, for example, we can see in the use of Irish in other films, such as by the IRA prisoners in Steve McQueen's Hunger. In an interview with the Journal, Colin Braid stated, quote, "It's an Irish language film, but it's also bilingual. It's not trying to make a political point by having everything in Irish. It's ironically a film about the limitations of language, particularly Irish people of the past, maybe still are not necessarily the best for using words to articulate how we really feel about things," end quote. Okay, I should have, mind. In examining how language does operate in this film, let's look at how in Kafka, Deleuze and Guattari make reference to what they term, quote, a tetralinguistic model, vernacular, maternal or territorial language used in rural communities or rural in origin, a vehicular, governmental, urban or even worldwide language, a language of business, commercial exchange, bureaucratic transmission, and so on, a language of the first sort of deterritorialization, which entails a cultural reterritorialization, mythic language on the horizon of cultures caught up in a spiritual or religious reterritorialization. So, end quote. What does that mean? Through tracing the ways in which Irish and English intersect in the lives of his characters, Barade articulates the complicated familial, affective, social, commercial, institutional, and political relations that are at play in this bilingual film. That the Irish language speakers are not speaking from the position of greatest marginality is made clear by the fact that Cott goes to stay with the Kinsellas in the first place. Her Irish-speaking foster parents are in a more secure and stable living situation, both economically and in terms of being at the heart of a small community, than her poorer, linguistically divided and seemingly socially isolated family of origin. Yet, the film presents Cott as a speaker of both English and Irish, navigating both languages through various forms of interaction with other persons and institutions, English in her school, Irish and English with members of her family and her foster family, Irish with neighbours in the Kinsellas community, English when making a shopping trip to Waterford to buy new clothes, and so on. As we see the different functions which language and languages play in her life, we are reminded of Deleuze and Guattari's statement in Kafka that, quote, even when it is unique, a language remains a mixture, a schizophrenic melange, a harlequin costume in which very different functions of language and distinct centres of power are played out, blurring what can be said and what can't be said. One function will be played off against the other. All the degrees of territoriality and relative deterritorialization will be played out, end quote. Cott's linguistic and social situation in this film can be described as cramped space, or as Deleuze and Guattari would have it, as the result of which everything is immediately politicized. On further and closer examination, the viewer can relate Cott's individual life story to the many complex themes in this film, set at a time when Ireland was a deeply religious and socially conservative country, very far from what it is today. These include familial estrangement, parenthood and the different troubles attached to both motherhood and fatherhood, including the social function of parenthood within a small community and the social impact of having it taken away, loss and grief, the inability of couples in 1980s Ireland to effectively control their own fertility, and the great economic changes which rural Ireland was living through at the time, shortly after the country's accession to the European community. As Deleuze and Guattari argue, quote, the individual concern thus becomes all the more necessary, indispensable, magnified, because a whole other story is vibrating within it. In this way, the family triangle connects to other triangles, commercial, economic, bureaucratic, juridical, that determine its values, end quote. Its are examined and delineated through the changing role of language. So the second main difference between Keegan's Foster and in Cailín Ciúin is that of point of view. Foster, the novella, is rather simply narrated, entirely told in the present tense, in a first-person narrative, and always from the point of view of the child. And indeed, many of the shots in Cailín Ciúin are similarly from the child's viewpoint, particularly in the early part of the film, when Cott arrives at the Kinsellas' house. Either they are explicitly point of view shots, or they are shots focused on the young girl and intended to show Cott's nervousness, her smallness of stature, and her hesitation in her large, comparatively affluent and unfamiliar new surroundings. So I'm thinking in particular of the early scenes in which she is bathed by her foster mother for the first time, or the scenes in which she nervously bids Ichawai, or good night, to her initially forbidding and seemingly unfriendly foster father. During these scenes too, we also see Eileen, the foster mother's point of view, in particular focused on Cott. Yet one scene in particular, before I do that, I'll just show you. So here's Cott getting out the car and seeing her foster mother, and here's she does a lot of spying in this film of the adults, members of the family, and that's what she's doing there. One scene in particular is interesting, however, both because of its role in the story and of its position in the film's linguistic landscape. Cott has been left without clothes because her neglectful father drove away with her case still in the car, and as such she has been forced to wear, initially unknowingly, the clothes of the Kinsellas' dead son, a practice which appears to function for her foster parents as both a new source of pain but also as a relief to it. Having discovered, along with the audience, of the true story of the Kinsellas' dead son, Cott is finally taken by them to the big town, the city of Waterford, to buy new clothes, a journey which involves stepping outside of the Irish language and into English for a small but pivotal scene. And it's this one here. Eileen buys the new clothes for Cot. We see her come out with them, wearing them on, shyly but happy. And then in a shot reverse shot combination, we then get this shot of the two women here, Eileen on the left and the saleswoman on the right. The shop assistant tells her in English, "And isn't your mammy good to you?" The scene, which if the filmmakers had wanted to shoot the whole feature in Irish, they could easily have skipped, but it is nonetheless crucial because it allows the audience to see the pair of Cot and Eileen through the eyes of the shop assistant. At the same time, we in the audience realise what pain the scene must be causing Eileen, who will never again have the opportunity to buy clothes for her own dead child. But we also see how natural and like a mother and daughter, how in a sense they do belong together. This superimposition of perspectives, both from and of the central foster mother-daughter pairing, allows us to explore a condition theorized by Pier Paolo Pasolini and drawn on by Deleuze in his cinema books, that of free and direct discourse. Free and direct discourse in cinematic terms means to go beyond the classic binary of the subjective point of view shot and the supposedly objective presentation of events from the point of view of an imagined omniscient observer. Free and direct discourse, therefore, refers to the multiplicity of overlapping perspectives in cinema, superimposed one on top of the other, as we examine and dissect this new foster family, both from the perspective of each of its members and also from the perspective of an English-speaking outsider. As Greg Lambert has argued, the situation of a minor literature is immediately characterized by a situation of free and indirect discourse. Patricia Pisters has also suggested that free and direct discourse is the inherent defining quality of political cinema. Quoting Deleuzian Guattari, she argues that free and direct styles create, quote, an a-centered plane of composition, instituting counterpoints between the heterogeneous elements of characters, current events, biographies, and camera eyes, end quote. This semi-subjective perception thus created is a necessary condition for what Deleuze termed the time image, and we begin to see the possibility of a new family for Cot based on affective rather than simply biological bonds, which casts further into relief her actual situation as an overlooked and effectively surplus child living precariously in poverty and a broken home. Deleuze and Guattari argue that, quote, the three characteristics of minor literature are the deterritorialization of language, the connection of the individual to political immediacy, and the collective assemblage of enunciation, end quote. So in this short paper, I have tried to give an initial sketch of how the conceptual tools offered us by Deleuze and Guattari are of use in interpreting this deceptively simple film. While it is neither an overtly and self-consciously political film, nor one which explicitly attempts to present a defined minority position, a closer reading of this film through these lenses helps us to uncover the many complex social and political themes which underpin the story of two families. Thank you very much.